This book was King of Battle and Blood by Scarlett St. Clair. I have read Scarlett St. Clair before. I believe, yeah, the Hades Persephone, just from Persephone's perspective, is just over there. But what hooked me is vampires. The actual first book of hers that I read was an audiobook for the first of that Persephone Hades series. So I really enjoy these books. This was another one that was a single narrator for everyone. And I'm starting to realize that I can be a little less judgmental because I'm not comparing the two narrators and how they're working together. I'm just listening to this one narrator who makes choices or who is directed in a certain way. And I don't have to go back and forth and compare the voices, the intonations, the tone, the cadence of one narrator versus the other. So this might be my little secret for audiobooks in the future or just for the time being. This book caught my eye because it is Scarlett St. Clair and I do like her writing a lot, but it is vampires. I know y'all are shocked that I was drawn into another vampire book. It's really so surprising, but this is a fantasy vampire, which means that vampires exist outside of our world. This does not take place in our world, it is totally separate. And the story of vampires is different. So that part is just the nerd, the vampire nerd in me who's always excited about that. It does play into this book, but it's not really the biggest part. So you got Adrian, this vampire king, who is taking over all of the nearby kingdoms, and he has come upon Isolde's kingdom. She is the princess, and they meet in the woods as she's kind of spying on the vampire army camped outside. And she knows that her father plans to surrender without battle. All the other kingdoms have fought and have died because vampires are pretty much unkillable. That's basically the option: surrender or die. And everybody else has chosen die. Her dad chooses surrender. So they meet in the woods, and there's this interesting little banter. And then when Adrian shows up, he says, "All right, you can surrender if I get your princess." And everybody puts this pressure on Isolde to kill Adrian on their wedding night. Yo, vampires are basically unkillable. How would she kill him? But Isolde, as we learn, is a warrior. She's been raised as a warrior. She's been raised to fight. She is incredibly competent. I like that. She's not a damsel in distress. So they have this basically as courthouse as you can get with a king wedding. And the night of their wedding, she stabs him. And it does nothing because, of course, it does. It does nothing. And she literally stabs him. There is a dagger covered in blood the next morning. And her chambermaid's like, looks like you didn't try hard enough. Are you kidding me? The story at large is good. It's really interesting. We travel back to the vampire kingdom. Isolde has to kind of reckon with this new world and all the things that she's been told about the vampire kingdom and vampire lore and their history. And we learn that things are not always what they appear. History can be rewritten if the wrong people are the people writing it. And so we watch her learn and get confused and frustrated and angry and sad about everything that she's been told and everything that she's discovers while she's with the vampires. There is a bigger kind of plot point about Adrian and Isolde. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't love that part. I could have done without that entirely, but I hope it plays into later books because if not, I don't know if it's I didn't feel it was necessary. The intimacy, and I'm this is the part where I do have I'm having a hard time really absorbing all the intimacy moments. It feels like there's a lot of intimacy, but what happens is Isolde goes, "No, never. I'll never invite you to my bed." Okay, I want to have sex with you. And look, it is you can change your mind at any point, any way, shape, or form. I just didn't believe it. She went from "I will never invite you into my bed again," and then falls asleep and wakes up and is like, "You know what? I am just that horny. I must have you." Okay. And it gave me kind of a weird feeling like that. I didn't love it. And I won't say it's because she was, saying no, but really meaning yes, because I hate that fucking phrase and I think that's just a terrible, terrible thing. But it, I just kept getting frustrated by her. So that was King of Battle and Blood by Scarlett St. Clair. Listen to the audiobook. Let me know if you listen to it too. This this is my fault. This is where not reading the synopsis bit me in the ass. The book is The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston, something like that. And for some reason, I can't explain it. I had it in my brain that this was a queer story. It's not. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with not a queer story, but I was looking forward to a queer story and got this book instead. So that threw me for a really big loop. I was not expecting it. Once I got over that, I had a really fun time. It was, I, I mean, I did call the twist the second it happened. I called the twist on page 111. So not just because I called it didn't mean that I didn't enjoy it. It it was almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it made me feel like I was so smart and so right because everything I thought was true. So if you're someone who doesn't mind not entirely being surprised, then read this book. Florence is a ghostwriter for this well-known romance writer, and her new editor Benji basically says you don't get an extension on this book. Now, the day that she doesn't get an extension on this book, and she can't write this fourth book because she's heartbroken because she has a terrible ex-boyfriend. He's terrible. They're all terrible. All ex-boyfriends in romance novels are terrible, pretty much. So, terrible ex-boyfriend, and he is. Really, he is. That night, her dad dies, and so she goes back to her hometown. And she and her dad share the ability to see ghosts. Her dad works and owns a funeral home, and her whole family is in her teeny tiny hometown. She goes back to the hometown to kind of deal with the death of her father. And while she's there, Ghost Benji shows up. And Florence believes that it's because his unfinished business is her manuscript, so she has to finish the manuscript for him. And he doesn't really tell her that. He's like, I don't think that's the reason, but doesn't explain why. We'll get there. And they meet each other and they talk and they have these in-depth conversations as the week progresses between arriving in this teeny tiny hometown and her father's funeral and all that goes along with that. And the ghost nature of it made it really interesting. It isn't like Megan Cabot's The Mediator series where she can touch ghosts. They're still non-corporeal. She can't touch them. She can't do anything with them. And Benji keeps getting pulled into this nether realm where he doesn't exist and he's not with her, but he doesn't know where he is. Hint, hint. They build a really touching relationship and they get to know each other and their banter is fun. And there's a lot of morbid humor in this. So if you're someone who's really triggered by death and humor and you're in the midst of that process and you can't handle this, and this is probably not the book for you. Also, this book is generously one spice, but I don't want to say like a green pepper because they have this really fun flirt where they're talking about scenes in romance novels and they have a little joke about consent and consent being sexy, and consent is incredibly sexy. So The Dead Romantics, not a queer book at all. It's a very straight book. There are queer people around her. Maybe that's it. There's non-binary people and her brother is gay and her sister is queer and her best friend is queer. So like there's a lot of queer around them, but they are not a queer couple. I have no idea where that came from, and that is really on me. But I really enjoyed it. It was a fun read. It was an easy read, and it was a feel-good read. I'm gonna say it. Anna Huang is sometimes really hit or miss for me, and this was just kind of a meh for me. It is King of Pride in the Kings of Sin series. I liked Kai so much in King of Wrath. I thought he was so fun and interesting, and I liked the banter between him and Dante and how he kind of messed with Vivian like that. And then when it came to King of Pride, I didn't feel that same love for him. This book is secret dating with Vivian's friend Isabella, who's working at a bartender at the kind of floofy doofy club that everybody's a part of. And so they're not supposed to date, but they do date, and there's chemistry. And not that I didn't believe their chemistry, but I felt like they just made silly choices and the consequences were what they expected. And so I didn't really feel a lot of drama around it. It didn't feel like their relationship had the gumption to really keep me entertained or to feel like they even would last in the long haul. I will say that the Jane Austen scene will live rent free in my brain for forever. But like sometimes with her books, I found that many of their more intimate moments even were just lightly written. There were big overarching statements and less description. And for those kind of big sweeping statements, I get really annoyed. And I'll go back to one of the ones from Twisted Love. I think it was he fucked me in every position imaginable. I'm like, no, no, friend, because if it took a week to do that, you have a bad imagination. My imagination, you wouldn't get through it in a week. It's not happening. And I feel like there were some of those big blanket statements that were made in this book, or big sweeping conversations about, oh, the wonderful intimacy they have, without the actual scenes. And you could take for granted, you can just kind of assume and believe Anna Huang around it. But because I know that she has written some great scenes, I am disappointed. I want those. I'm like the Jane Austen one, crawl to me. Who? Thank you. I want that level every time. Um, or clean up your mess, Vivian. Just those are moments that are so special and so fun. And so when not everything has to be at the same level, of course, but like it almost felt like a cop out for me when it came to some of these moments. Do I read the rest of these books, y'all? This one made me not excited. Do I care enough about the rest of them to keep going? Or do I have y'all's permission to push pause? I don't even want to say this. I don't even want to like put these words out there, but Blood on the Tide was a real slog for me. I know. No one is more surprised than I am. It did not land. This book is not that long. It took me days longer than books typically this length to finish. I felt like it was slow. It dragged. The intimacy was very short. Like the scenes were just short. One of the notes I wrote in the margins was, "That's it, and we're done." You've got Lizzie, who you will remember from Hunt on Dark Waters and even Court of Vampire Queen, and Maeve, who is a Selkie that is rescued by the ship Lizzie is on. If you listen to the podcast episode with Sephi and me, I don't know how to say that. It's too Irish for me. I don't know how to say it's not Quinn Onwin. I know it's not, but that's the best that my mouth can do at this moment. And they basically set off together. Maeve's Selkie skin has been stolen by a rogue, and Lizzie is still looking for the jewels, the family heirlooms that were stolen in Hunt on Dark Waters. They find the Selkie skin real fast. Cool. And then they decide to stay together. Cool. Like Lizzie doesn't want to go back to her overly controlling mother and be a breeding vampire, breeding human, be a breeding vampire for her mother's legacy. I get it. I totally understand that. But it did not land for me. I mean, really sad. I was excited about this being a sapphic novel. It's been a while since she's written something that's totally sapphic for me. I know she wrote that in her novellas, her villains novellas, but Wicked Villains, I think, is the name of that series. I was really excited to see what she does with a sapphic relationship because there have been so many queer in other stories of hers. And for some reason, this one just did not land for me. And I don't want to badmouth Katee Robert because I will pre-order everything that she's did. I have signed up for her Kickstarter already, the Black Rose auction. It's not just her, it's a lot of other authors, even some authors that I do not like. And I signed up the moment it went live. So I love her. If you like ladies, maybe that book will, and maybe it's just like not the kind of sapphic romance I'm looking for. That's true. Like there are straight romances that I don't like, and also there are every kind of romance. You got your thing, and I don't think it's because it was sapphic. There have been sapphic romances that I loved. For some reason, this one just did not land. There's a one bed trope in there. There's a one bed trope in this bitch, and it still didn't resonate. I'm giving it a 3.75 because I love Katee Roberts so much, and because I'm not mad I read it. It will tie into the greater world, but it was just not for me. All right, y'all. This is going to be short and sweet because I read Sunstone Volume 2, and instead of a what I thought about it, I am here to announce that it is part of the second installment of the book club for the podcast. I read Volume 1 and Volume 2 with Courtney, and we will be discussing it. And that episode will launch in July. Hopefully by that point we have a date and it's right up here. Is it right up here? It's right up here. And I am so excited. These books absolutely floored me. I was not expecting it. It is a shift from my typical reading in that it's a graphic novel, and the conversation that Courtney and I got to have about these two books, about these two volumes, there are 8 in total, is something that it feels very vulnerable, a little scary for me, but I think that y'all will really enjoy.